one thing the SNES lacked somewhat was unlicensed games. Whereas the NES was chock full of them, there was only ever one unlicensed game released in the West, the almighty Super Noah's Ark 3D. However, Nintendo did seem to make it a bit easier to obtain that oh so important seal of approval in any case, meaning that a lot of odd games came out anyway. Games that perhaps could have been unlicensed in the NES era were now fully licensed in the SNES era. Perhaps that goes away to explaining the case of Raya Systems, publishers of some of the system's most infamous and strangely bad titles. How does a company that established themselves through telehealth products get into publishing SNES games anyway? And why? Raya Systems released 4 games on the SNES, all of which with a similar aim. For the most part, they aren't just intended to educate people about a medical condition, they're intended to help people with said condition. The exception to this being the unbelievably wretched Rex Ronan Experimental Surgeon, a game about the effects of smoking that frankly just makes you want to chuff down a carton before too long. The others are different. Bronkie the Bronchiasaurus is an incompetently made platformer that's designed to help kids with asthma. Packy and Marlin is also an incompetently made platformer that's designed to help teenagers with diabetes. And then there's their most famous game, the one we're looking at here that's also about diabetes, Captain Novolin. As alluded to, Raya Systems' background was wholly in medical products, what would fall under the category of telehealth, electronic reminders to take your pills, or products that would inform you all about a condition, and so forth, usually aimed at children. With this in mind, these games aren't actually much of a stretch for them, they're the same thing that they always did, only in video game form. Obviously, they didn't know anything about video games aside from their potential usefulness as a conduit for vital medical information, and so the making of the games was given over to basically any low-rent developer for hire who would provide a game at a low cost, namely WaveQuest, who made both Packy and Marlin and Bronkie, and Sculptured Software, creators of Rex Ronan and this game here. The result of this was obvious. The games were terrible. Captain Novolin is the best of them, and that's not saying much to be honest. But more than judging them as games, how do they actually fare as telehealth products? So if you don't know the plot then, Captain Novolin is a superhero with type 1 diabetes who has to save the diabetic mayor of Pineville from aliens posing as various junk foods, jumping donuts, one-in chocolate bars, murderous Coke bottles and the like. He has no discernible superpowers other than maybe the ability to use a treadmill and the ability to manage his diabetes. In-game he cannot even attack enemies. Captain Novolin saves the mayor on a tight schedule. Breakfast, after breakfast, before lunch, lunch, dinner and after dinner. The unique thing about the game is that while there's lots of food dotted around the stages, Captain Novolin cannot eat them all. If he does, his blood sugar will go through the roof. You must stick to the food that your doctor has recommended, and ideally eat just one of each through the stage. If you're not in the safe zone or if you get hit, the captain will get very woozy indeed, ultimately collapsing if he takes too much damage. As you play, you also encounter facts about diabetes, guidance on your level of insulin, questions to answer and so forth, including a log of all the food you consumed and what it did to your blood sugar levels at the end of each day. Everything you ever wanted to know about diabetes but were afraid to ask. And by the way, if you didn't know, Novolin is a brand of insulin made by a pharmaceutical company called Novo Nordisk, making Captain Novolin, yep, a licensed game. And a very odd one at that. As a telehealth product designed purely for kids, Captain Novolin could be considered a success. It does inform you all about diabetes, and it even provides a concrete example of what can happen if your blood sugar goes too high, not to mention the visual reminders, the act of actually filling up the syringe and taking your insulin, or checking your blood sugar level with the help of a colour-coded chart. Raya Systems actually had medical studies carried out for all of their games, and they found that kids who played the game knew more about diabetes and how to manage their diabetes afterwards. It's just that as a game, It stinks, and the project as a whole just has a fatal flaw. I mean, the game stuff is obvious. Novolin has one of the wretched, most uncontrollable jumps in existence, the graphics and music are horrific, there's no attack. It's a woefully made game, almost as basic as a platform game could possibly be, and yet it fails at that. That it's easily the best of Raya Systems games should tell you a lot about the others. Rex Ronan and Bronkie are for me easily amongst the very worst games released for the SNES. Packy and Marlin and Liss are not far behind. In all cases, well, the developers were just rubbish and incompetent. Simple as that. Commissioned to deliver a game as quickly and as cheaply as possible, they succeeded. There's no real mystery here. The games were bad because they were cheap, and Raya's total lack of knowledge about games meant there wasn't a whole lot of quality control on that end. The other problem in the end was, well, with video games themselves. Raya's intentions were good, and their idea was different, but games about diabetes weren't even likely to capture the attention of kids with diabetes. I mean, put yourself in said kids' shoes. With parents ready to splash money out on a game, an event that might only happen twice or so a year, would you pick a game that was going to remind you and educate you about your condition, or, I don't know, Super Metroid? It's obvious really, isn't it? There were better ways to cover the information on diabetes, ones that didn't have to compete with other video games. It's hard to even envision the games being in stores where a well-meaning parent might pick it up, but it would hardly make a kid happy. And yet Raya made 4 of these games. Perhaps various hospitals or clinics picked them up for kids to play while waiting to be seen or win a hospital bed, and that was how they made their money? Who knows? In any case, the existence of these games is usually roundly mocked, with Captain Novolin often getting the worst of it due to being slightly more famous than the others. It's not really as simple as the games just being terrible, and I think that Raya might have even had a good idea in theory, from a telehealth point of view anyway, but not really in practice. And it was probably for the best that Raya's dalliance with video games ended in the 16-bit era. Alas, more than anything else, well, it's easy to say, but they quite literally just didn't get video games. Simple as that. See you tomorrow.